Hello, guys. I'm Tom Lorenzo. Next slide. So the question I want to dive into is, should we speak up or should we shut up? Sorry if that sounds rude. Meaning, should you as a brand speak up and actively advocate for causes or issues that align with your brand values as part of your story that you're telling? And this is a conversation that's been kind of happening for a while. We've been having it for a while. And we think that the big difference is this used to be an optional conversation. Used to feel like you can check out of that conversation if you want. We think this is now a required conversation because the landscape has changed quite a bit. And it's not required that you necessarily speak up or that you necessarily shut up, but it's required that you have a strategy where you understand this is why I'm doing it, this is why I am not doing it, and these are the events that could happen that could force me to change my position. So we think having a strategy here is now a requirement. And right now there are opportunities, obviously, and there are tremendous risks. And these days, there's tremendous risks whether you speak up or shut up. So you can get in trouble by not doing anything, which is kind of difficult. And you could find yourself on the wrong end of the wrong kind of spotlight, the wrong end of a backlash. And you can find yourself with a great opportunity to make a really strong connection with folks. And you can also find yourself with an opportunity to do something good if you're so inclined. So we think this is not elective. This is a requirement. We need to talk about this. And we need a strategy that helps answer that question. And just to kind of supporting details, I mean, one of the things that's happening right now is, and you guys are seeing this is proliferating. This is huge. Brands are getting into this in a big way. Just looking at the number of brands kind of supporting cause sponsorship has increased dramatically over the last few years, which is just a little tiny piece of the whole thing. More anecdotally, I'm on some judging panels and juries for these advertising award things, and it's about 80% of the work is cause-related these days. And the best, most impactful work is really cause-related. So this is kind of everywhere, and we need to focus on it. Everything from Burger King making anti-bullying a part of their story, to this financial consultancy putting up the Fearless Girl statue to make a statement about gender pay equality, which turns out they're not very good at, if you know the whole story, to more kind of like what Damien was talking about, CEOs like Mark Zuckerberg talking about things that are explicitly political, like DACA, like Dreamers, and this is kind of new. Brands are very, very active in this space. And for us, we're on the front lines of this more and more. For us, part of that is over the last few years, we've started working with cause brands more and more. Everybody from the Ad Council. I saw these guys out here somewhere. Yeah, shout out to the Ad Council. And we now work with Meals on Wheels. We work with some corporate responsibility folks. And they're obviously in the speak up category very clearly, and we've learned a lot from working with them. And the rest of our clients, a lot of them are obviously in the entertainment industry, and for them, they're inherently part of the spotlight. They're in the public eye, and so they need to navigate these waters just as much or more than anyone. So this is a big change. This is new. This is different than the way it used to be. Brands didn't always act this way. Back in, say, the 1980s, which were my glory years. That's me right there. Those are. I really love those sunglasses. I kind of wish I still had those. But back in the 1980s, brands did not act like this, and back in the past, they were not leaning into divisive issues or contentious issues. They might be supporting causes and things like that, but nothing that was potentially contentious. So, or for the most part, some exceptions, which I'll mention later. So the question is, what changed? And I think the answer we probably all know is people changed. And why people changed is probably a big topic that we're not going to get into today. But I think as marketers, we could focus on people. We could focus on consumers and the insight about consumers that can help drive our strategies. I think the driving insight of the moment is consumers are relating to brands on a values level, and more they're actually expecting brands to get into these conversations. And the change is really startling. And I know what everybody's going to think, and it's not just because of millennials. Sorry, guys, you're not the only ones that care about people here. Even young Tom might care about where his sunglasses came from, which are very cool, by the way. But millennials, but a larger portion of millennials do support causes than previous generations. But a lot of what people are not talking about is even older generations. Gen X, which is my generation, I guess, and baby boomers, they're evolving. They're evolving their views. It's not static, and more people are beginning to look at brands in alignment with their values and expect them to be part of this broader conversation. And you see this when you look at some of these stats, which are kind of startling when you think about it. 66% of consumers say it's important for brands to take public stand on social and political issues. That's not millennials, that's not one segment, that's all consumers. 92% say they have a more positive image of a company when it supports a social environmental cause that they align with. All consumers. And while the degree of people's interest in this is not equal, for example, more liberals kind of feel that brands are credible when they do this than conservatives. Overall, the feeling amongst consumers is that it's a positive thing when brands get involved in these conversations and that they actually expect them to. And that's a major change. And we're not just talking about a segment, we're kind of talking about everybody now, which is a big difference. And for us, that means we need to answer this question. We need to answer the question, speak up or shut up. It's critical right now that we have a strategy. And when we think about, okay, how do we develop a strategy? What are we kind of focusing on? For us, we're focusing on, kind of from a very broad sense, 3 different things that we need to dive into, we need to think about, we need to answer a lot of questions about. That's values. What are the values of the brand and the organization? The audience. How does the audience align with those values? What is their perception of those values? And action. When do you actually bring those values to life? And what are your lines in the sand that, if crossed, are going to make you act? So we're going to dive into each of these just kind of briefly. So values is the first one, obviously, because without these, you kind of have nothing. This is the foundation of any strategy here, are values. And I think the biggest question is, can you articulate your brand's values? And if I asked multiple people in your organization, would they have the same answer? Now, Google, Jason just did a great presentation. Clearly, they have values that they all recognize, which is awesome. But not every organization does. And if you don't, and if you don't think you can pass the test of asking multiple people in your organization about values and having the same answer, then you need to start defining those things. And you might have some work ahead of you. And depending on the brand, you might have some kind of inherent value. Some brands it's easier, it's kind of baked in. Other ones kind of need to think about it and develop it. But either way, the big question is whether those values feel genuine, they feel true. Because if they do, you can make some really, really strong connections with folks. And if they don't, you can have a big problem on your hands. You can get some backlash. So just a couple of examples. So Patagonia is an awesome brand, which personally I like. I also like their photography, which is pretty cool. So they are a brand that has great, great, clear values. And they have from the very beginning. They're actually a little different than what I was talking about before. They've been in the cause game from the very beginning, from like the 70s, whenever they started. And they are very heavily into environmental issues, conservation issues, and they are clear with their values internally and externally. And they have a track record of really supporting these values. So that means when they do something, when they bring them to life, it feels genuine, it feels true, it feels authentic. So for example, when the Trump administration created some policy that was threatening some monuments on public land, Patagonia could do something like this. And though people might disagree with them, some people support the administration on this, no one is saying, or pretty much no one is saying, Patagonia is exploiting that issue for their own benefit, because Patagonia has a very, very clear set of values, and when they bring them to life, it feels natural, just feels right. An example closer to home is Wicked, and I saw some Wicked folks in here as well, too. We love Wicked. The values of Wicked are kind of baked into the show, and what's great about Wicked is they are clear, and they can bring them to life. So values like friendship, acceptance, diversity, those are part of Wicked, and if they bring them to life, it feels genuine, it feels true. And here's a couple of examples of Wicked bringing those to life. So in the last few years, we've been pushing out content like this with Wicked. And this is content that's been pushed out at various divisive moments or moments around cause. And it speaks to the values of Wicked, and it connects with an audience of folks in kind of a big way, in a values-driven way. And this content right here is some of Wicked's most successful content. Some of the individual pieces, like the one on the left, was over 1 million organic views, which is kind of crazy without a spend. So this type of content for Wicked also feels genuine. It feels true. You can buy it coming from Wicked, because Wicked has some clear sets, a clear set of values. And we think when we push out content like this, we're connecting with folks on that values level, and we're making a very, very strong connection. Now, here's an example of the wrong side of the whole thing. I'm not sure if any of you guys saw this. But this is an example from Facebook. So after the horrible hurricane in Puerto Rico, Facebook used their VR platform to transport Mark Zuckerberg and another executive from Facebook down to the kind of ravaged Puerto Rico to kind of take a look at the devastation. And the thought is right, I think. The press wasn't necessarily covering the devastation enough. They should have covered it more. Facebook was stepping in saying, hey, look what's going on down here. But when you look at the kind of cartoonish avatar of Mark Zuckerberg over the devastated landscape, you immediately think this is probably not a good idea. And that's what a lot of people thought. And Facebook had a ton of backlash, which seems to be their thing now, about this. And a lot of people were saying they were exploiting this disaster for their own purposes. And whether that was fair or not to Facebook, who knows? I mean, maybe if they didn't use these silly avatars, they wouldn't have gotten in trouble. But what I think is Facebook's intent wasn't clear. Their values were not clear. People just didn't buy it from Facebook. They thought they were just shilling for their VR platform. So they didn't buy it. If another brand did this, like let's say Patagonia, not that would make sense, but for argument's sake, I think people would buy it. And even if they had these cartoon avatars, because people understand the values of a brand like Patagonia, where Facebook, it's a little more wishy-washy. So values are the foundation. And values, we need to kind of start defining these in a way that Google did. Where it was very clear that can move in, you can move those values into action. You can make those part of your story. So if you don't know your values, it's time to start talking about it. We, as an agency, are doing that internally for ourselves as we grow and we become more of a brand, and of course for our clients. So values is the foundation, the most important thing. The second thing is audience. So audience, for marketers, obviously we need to know our audience. That's the whole thing. But these days we also need to know how they perceive our values and how they align with our values. Because if we do that, there's a great opportunity to make a great connection. And if we don't do that, there's a tremendous amount of risk. And in either direction, you're invariably going to create some negativity. Because as you take a stand for something, or you lean into values, you're going to alienate a piece of your audience. And in some cases, that negativity is actually a good thing for your brand, and I'll go over an example of that. And in some cases, it's a kind of a disaster. So remember this post that did very, very well. The vast majority of folks really supported this post. But there was a small minority that didn't like this, not surprisingly. And ironically, though, that small minority, by not liking it, creates discourse that actually pushes this content out further, extends the reach of this content. So if somebody sees this and says, I'm here to follow your musical, not hear your political views, then a whole bunch of other people jump in. This is my favorite. Don't bite the jazz hand that feeds you. That's an actual comment from someone. I think we should invite her to the show if Wicked's here. She's awesome. But a whole bunch of people come in and create this discourse and this conversation that extends the reach of this content to even more people, and the vast majority of those more people see this as positive. And so that's just a piece of the puzzle, but a little bit of negativity can actually cause the content to spread in a good way. It can be a net positive. This content, even with the Facebook algorithm changes that I'm sure most of us are aware of that have kind of throttled organic content, this type of content is more immune than other content for us. This is still performing at a relatively high level, even in the face of these changes. But you have to know who that audience is, and you have to kind of be willing to accept a little bit of negativity and understand that that negativity could actually be a net positive for you. But that balance is the thing you got to figure out, because sometimes it could kind of blow up in your face like it did for Keurig. And I think that's how you say Keurig, right? Is that right? I'm not sure if I ever pronounced that correctly. But Keurig, there's a great story around Keurig, who was kind of in a tight spot. And I think this is a tight spot because, number one, they didn't understand their values, but they also didn't understand their audience. So this story begins, like many, on the Sean Hannity show, which is a great show, guys. I don't know if you watch it, but just absolutely amazing, very entertaining. But just kidding. So Roy Moore, who was on Sean Hannity talking about these kind of terrible sexual allegations against him, and Sean Hannity, a lot of people thought, was going easy on Roy Moore. And Keurig was an advertiser on the show, and people saw this. And this guy, Angelo, who's the head of Media Matters, which is a kind of liberal-leaning organization, saw it, wrote to Keurig and said, hey, what are you guys doing sponsoring that show? Come on, do you support people going easy on child molesters, and a lot of people jumped in and said, yeah, what are you doing, Keurig? And Keurig, very, very relatively quickly, wrote back and said, thanks, Angelo. You know what? We're pulling our commercial. We're not going to run on the Hannity show anymore. It's all good. Problem solved. High fives at Keurig. It's over. But that really just started what was a massive backlash from their conservative audience, because Keurig is not necessarily a liberal brand or a conservative brand. Everybody has Keurig, and in this case, conservatives got very, very upset to the point where they were actually destroying their machines and posting them online, which is kind of crazy. And these videos are actually kind of awesome to watch. I like to sit here and watch these for hours. They're very strangely compelling. But this is a huge amount of backlash, and Keurig's in a very tight spot. They've got liberals that like Keurig, they've got conservatives, and in either direction, they're kind of screwed because they've got to deal with these two constituencies. I have a Keurig machine. I'm more on the liberal side. But also my dad, who's the one in the middle, not on the left, he has a Keurig machine, and he voted for Trump. So we both have it. So no matter what Keurig did, they were going to upset either myself or my father. So they were in a very, very tight spot. And what could they possibly do here? And in this case, the CEO of Keurig issued a memo that got widely distributed thereafter, which essentially apologized, backtracked on the whole thing, saying they shouldn't have been a part of this conversation. And, was that the right move? Who knows? But I would say Keurig messed up here. And how did they mess up? They messed up for a few reasons. Number one is I don't think they know their values, and I don't think the audience knows their values. What does Keurig stand for? Who the heck knows? I don't know. And I don't think they know their audience. I don't think they really understood how they would react in that balance of negativity. They didn't understand there was too much negativity there, potential, so why do that? And the third thing is they clearly weren't aligned. So there was one group within the organization that said, oh yeah, let's pull the ad. That's a great idea. But that clearly wasn't part of a bigger strategy. So this is a great example of somebody doing the wrong thing. But audience is a big part of it. You have to understand the audience. You have to understand their reaction. You have to be okay with the little negativity and understand where that tipping point is, where that negativity goes into something that's a little too much. And the final piece that we're kind of looking at is action. And a lot of the stuff I've been talking about is action, obviously, but specifically, when do you act? How do you predetermine your strategy for action? So what is that line in the sand that if crossed is going to drive you to act, even if you've chosen not to be involved in this conversation? Because everybody has one. And you never know whether your inaction will cause that. Will cause that spotlight to hit you and suddenly you're on, and what do you do? That is probably the most compelling reason to listen to me right now. There's great opportunity, but that unwanted spotlight, if you are not ready for it, that is a tremendous risk. So how do we develop rules of engagement? How do we develop this strategy for action before things happen? Here's an example of that. So Meals on Wheels America, which is our client, we started working with them in 2016 with the Ad Council, another shout out for the Ad Council, on a campaign they were doing. And then in 2017, we became their digital agency. And Meals on Wheels is awesome. Everybody probably knows what Meals on Wheels is. But Meals on Wheels wasn't, at least, not in the cultural conversation that much. They were not in the news cycle very much, at least when we started. And we had been on the account in this capacity for 6 to 8 weeks, not very long. We're strategizing, we were beginning to do some stuff when something happened that kind of changed everything. And it was President Trump issued his kind of top-line vision of what his budget is. And he issued this in early 2017. They don't vote on the budget till later in the fall, but this was his vision for how the federal budget should roll out. And in that budget, and thanks to the New York Times and some others for pointing it out, there were massive direct or indirect cuts to Meals on Wheels America in the hundreds of millions, massive cuts. And Meals on Wheels didn't just see this. A lot of people saw this, and what was awesome is tons of people jumped on this and really criticized the administration for these massive cuts, because there's a lot of support for Meals on Wheels. But this is Meals on Wheels, right? That was kind of, people know what it is again, but it's not necessarily in the news cycle. Now, it's in the news cycle. The spotlight is on it, and we're like, oh shit, here we go. This is going to be interesting. And it was kind of awesome. But this was kind of a big moment. And the thing is, Meals on Wheels has a great foundation. So we had begun our strategy work with them. We had sort of created a bit of a framework of what they should do in terms of communication on digital, a bit of a framework of their kind of rules of engagement. But what really helped is Meals on Wheels is very clear in its values. And they're baked in, and we think consumers really, or their audience at least, really understood their values. Number two is Meals on Wheels was very clear in their audience, and they have a bipartisan audience. People from the left are fond of Meals on Wheels. People from the right are fond of Meals on Wheels. Hillary Clinton likes Meals on Wheels, and my Trump voting dad likes Meals on Wheels. And they love Meals on Wheels, and I just put this up there because my dad would kill me if he ever saw this. And I'm going to send him a picture of that. But Meals on Wheels has to navigate these different constituencies. So we had the benefit, and this all happened, and they figured that stuff out way before us. So we had the benefit of that foundation. And when we had started coming in, we wish we had more time, but we had the framework of a strategy, and we had the beginnings of our kind of rules of engagement, our lines in the sand, and what do we do. So we were we wish we had been more, but fairly ready to take strategic action here to counter the threats and to see some opportunity, because there was also a lot of opportunity in this. And the threats were very clearly these actual cuts, these hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cuts, and an administration that was kind of sending out some disinformation about the impact of these cuts. So it was very exciting because Sean Spicer would get up and spit out some fact that was completely inaccurate, and we would have to go on social and counter that fact, which we did with content like on the right, which really spoke to the impact of the federal budget on funding Meals on Wheels. So we pushed out a lot of this types of content and amplified it with partners. And at the same time, we drove an advocacy campaign. We spun it up very, very quickly, which petitioned Congress to not allow these cuts to move forward. And this happened fairly quickly. And the other thing we did, on the opportunity side, is begin to fundraise. And Meals on Wheels America wasn't necessarily big into grassroots funding at that moment, but when that spotlight hit, that was an opportunity. People were coming to them wanting to give money, and they seized the opportunity, and we seized the opportunity with them to go out there and say, okay, let's begin this fundraising drive. Let's turn this spotlight into an opportunity for us. And because we had that foundation, we were ready enough for that to take advantage of it. And now this type of grassroots fundraising moving forward is a massive part of their strategy, and it's kind of completely changed everything. So long story short is, the fall comes, and this budget that Trump had put forward did not pass. I think he was just trying to scare people. But actually, Meals on Wheels got a funding increase, which is awesome. And we think that's partly to the efforts of everyone involved. And the problem is big, so we actually want more money, but we consider it a win. And the reason I bring it up, though, is because I think it illustrates this is how to be ready when that spotlight hits you. And what Meals on Wheels did correctly is they already knew their values, they already knew their audience, and they at least had the beginnings of a framework of a strategy, so we were able to act in a strategic way. Because what you don't want is that spotlight to hit you and you act in just a panicky way, which I've seen many people do and which could really be a disaster. So this is a big lesson, whether you're in the cause space or not. How are you understanding your values, understanding your audience, and understanding where that line in the sand is that's going to push you into action. And I would say the last thing I want to say is this is not going anywhere. This is roughly how long it is till the next presidential election. And this is probably going to be one of the most divisive presidential elections in our history. And this will only throw gasoline on every single thing I'm talking about. So this is going to be huge. And this is going to be more and more relevant. And more, whether you choose to speak up or shut up, more and more you have to at least understand why you're doing it, why you're not doing it, and what can compel you to change your position.